Page 6, Part 2. Since time immemorial, there have been many aphorisms in regard to the might of the thoughts, such as, quote, "The might of the thoughts determines the actions of the human being." Quote, "The might of the thoughts determines the life of the human being." Quote, "The personality forms itself by means of the might of the thoughts." Quote, "The human being is just the way he or she uses the might of his or her thoughts," and so on and so forth. These aphoristic words were already coined by wise human beings in ancient times, yet in their original wording, they have been lost for a long time. Nevertheless, the original sense of these aphorisms has been maintained, even if only in a weakened or even falsified form, as the following example shows. Quote, "The human being becomes or is just the way he or she thinks." The verse now only speaks purely of human beings thinking, however, no longer in any form of the tremendous might of the thoughts. But exactly this might is of enormous significance. Indeed, it is that which is most important of all pertaining to the thoughts, because only through the might are the thoughts brought to fruition. The thoughts alone, if they are therefore devoid of their might, that is to say, of their power, are harmless and incapable of getting anything going. Therefore, they actually need their might/power in order to be able to come to fruition, e.g., in a deed or action, in the shaping of the morality, of the mentality, of the character, and of the entire personality, or in the form of an idea or fantasy, as well as in wishes and many kinds of other diverse things. Many human beings nurture wish dreams, those which do come to fruition and others which always remain unable to be fulfilled. But the might and power of the thoughts, through which something is brought to fruition, exists in both forms, and this is indeed so in any case. In one case, through the might of the thoughts, the wish dream brings itself to fruition, while in the other, the wish dream remains just that, whereby, however, it constantly revives and equalizes the psyche. So in both cases, the might of the thoughts brings itself to fruition as the success, and as that which the human being thinks. Therefore it is right when it is said, quote, "That which the human being mightfully thinks manifests for him or her." The might of the thoughts not only embraces the human being's entire vasen, but it is so comprehensive that there is nothing of which a human being could conceive which would not be integrated into it. The might of the human being's thoughts embraces every condition and every circumstance of the human being's life. Consequently, the human being is always exactly that which he or she mightfully thinks. As a result of this, without any doubt, character, morality, and personality are the complete sum of the might of the thoughts. This also applies to the state of the psyche and the state of the thought-creating consciousness itself, and, indeed, regardless of which form of behavior they have. Thoughts are might, regardless of which kind they are. Through a primal creational law, it is given that might and power are provided as an adjunct to the thoughts, so that they are creative and do not lose themselves in the emptiness of the senselessness. Thoughts are always paired with might and power, because only thereby is progress guaranteed. However, thoughts without power and might are like a body without vitality, like a fire without warmth, or like a word without sense. A plant, sprouts from a seed, and can therefore not come into existence without it. It is also exactly the same with the acts, deeds, and wishes of the human being, as well as with the human being's character, morality, and entire personality, as well as with the state of his or her psyche. Everything springs forth from the might of the human being's thoughts, which sprout and unfold from an idea, or from a perception, or from some other form, quite like a plant, which has its origin in a seed. Regarded symbolically, ideas, perceptions, and other forms are the seeds of human thoughts, which could never become reality without the fertilization. But once they are animated and created, then they develop their own life exactly as with the plants. And exactly as with these, they create in themselves their own power and might through which everything internal and external is formed. And this applies to everything and anything. Thus it applies to the same degree to all acts and deeds as well as to all other conditions and circumstances of life. Whether acts and deeds, as well as conditions and circumstances and so forth result, are used, or are formed, spontaneously and without deliberation, or are willingly and thereby intentionally carried out, plays no role in this. All acts and deeds, the forming of the morality, of the character, and of the entire personality as well as the psyche, are flowers of the thoughts and their monstrous might. Thus also joy and sorrow depend on the might and power of the thoughts, as do love or hate, peace or unpeace, modesty or craving for recognition, lies or love of the truth, belief or knowledge, honesty or insincerity, and honorableness and unhonorableness, and so on and so forth. No matter what is referred to and regarded, whether something negative or positive, it is always the fruit of the might of the thoughts, regardless of whether it is personally created or is created by third parties. Thus the human being actually gathers the sweet as well as the bitter fruits which he or she cultivates, himself or herself, by means of the might of the thoughts, or which are created by others outside of his or her own thinking. However, what the human being is, in himself or herself, in his or her morality, character, and entire personality, and what the state of his or her psyche is, that is his or her own very, very own matter. Regarded in this kind and wise, the human being is therefore the smith of his or her own life. Whatever the human being is the result of that human being's own thoughts, which were drafted and put together in his or her own consciousness, and then brought into effect through the might and power which is inherent in the thoughts. If negative thoughts are maintained in this way, regardless of whether it is knowingly or unknowingly, then negative effects also follow. However, if the thoughts are healthy and are thereby neutral, positive, equalized, then the effect also corresponds to that. However, there is also room in the neutral, positive, equalized thinking for negative inclusions, which should not simply be suppressed, but rather must be processed in a neutral, positive, equalized way in order to achieve an effective equalization. Therefore, one must not think in an only purely positive or only purely negative form, rather precisely in a neutral, positive, equalized form, with the same amount of both parts. Joy and sorrow lie very close together, just as day and night, or rainy weather and sunshine. Thus, in the life of the human being, joys follow sorrow, always alternating according to the form of the thinking which allows its power and might to prevail in negative or positive forms. The realms of the mightful thoughts are therefore negative as well as positive, but neither one kind nor the other may be used exclusively, because in this form they bring harm, indeed, as negative or positive Ausartung. Therein lie the grounds for why a healthy form of thinking consists of a neutral positive, equalized thinking. As a matter of fact, the human being is not an artificial creation, but the creation of creational intelligence, and thereby a creation which has evolved through the law of universal creation, of universal consciousness. This applies to the woman as it does to the man and to the children. But the law of universal creation is a law of cause and effect, as applies to all creational areas of law. And precisely this law says that every thought enlivened by might and power must, as a cause, also bring a quite certain effect. Everything which is kept concealed pertaining to the human being becomes obvious as a result of this cause-effect principle, since it absolutely and unwaveringly exposes the mysterious realms of the thinking once the effects of the thoughts become visible, audible, or perceptible, and indeed, for the particular human being himself or herself, as well as for others. The effects of the causal thoughts are therefore as visible as the material things of the world. As a consequence of the cause-effect principle of the thoughts, a virtuous, noble, and modest character and a corresponding personality are not a matter of random chance or the result of a lottery, which must simply be accepted, but instead they are a matter of a self-determined, good, positive destiny, and are the natural result of right, neutral, positive, equalized thinking, and of the willing, constant efforts to nurture a corresponding effect of a long-tended connection with creationally right thoughts. This is quite the opposite of the low kind of thoughts, in which the cause-effect principle produces a virtueless, ignoble, and immodest character profile and a corresponding personality, because one persists in continually remaining with purely negative and, quote, groveling thoughts. From birth, a human being constantly works on himself or herself, and in fact, either in positive or negative form, whereby the positive must always be seen as neutral, positive, equalized. At the latest, from the point in which one becomes conscious of oneself, one creates oneself by means of oneself, or one destroys oneself. The consciousness is the armory of the thoughts, which might fully come to fruition. But the thoughts are not only indispensable good tools for the forming of acts and deeds, the forming of the morality, the character, of the entire personality, the psyche, and all other matters, conditions, and circumstances, and so forth, but they are also deadly weapons with which the human being is able to destroy himself or herself. So, joy or sorrow are therefore created through the might of the thoughts, in each case according to whether they are created with the good tools of love, strength, peace, and harmony, and so forth, or whether a self-destruction is brought about with the deadly weapons. If the right choice is made and the might of the thoughts is used in the right way, then the human being climbs in his or her evolution and gains knowledge, love, peace, harmony, and wisdom. But if the might of the thoughts is abused and wrongly used, then the human being sinks down into the deepest abyss of self-destruction, of contempt for humanity, and of human extermination, as well as into the deepest abyss of a general disdain for the life. And as a matter of fact, the human being then sinks deeper than is possible for all the animals. And there are actually only these two extremes, between which lie all human shades of the human being's morality, character, psychical state, and entire personality. Extremes and shades which the human being himself or herself creates, often consciously and often unconsciously. Of all the entire truth in regard to the spirit and its energy, as well as in regard to the creation itself and its laws and recommendations, which in the New Age is especially awakened to new life and is brought out into the open as well as into the consciousness of the human being, the part which is certainly one of the most important is that which speaks of how the human being, who is conscious of himself or herself, and has a normal rationality, is the master of his or her own thoughts, and is therefore also master over the might of his or her thoughts. And this applies to both genders, to the woman just as it does to the man, who, as human beings, are subject to no distinction, and in any case are integrated into the same rights and obligations, and indeed in every regard. But the fact that the human being is master of his or her own thoughts, and also possesses might over them, means that he or she is the creator of his or her own morality, character, and entire personality. Along with that, he or she is also the creator of the state of his or her own psyche, and is the smith of his or her entire life circumstances, environment, and entire destiny. This is determined by the truth of the creational laws and recommendations, through the truth of the spirit and its energy. And this truth reveals that the most enjoyable and richest thing which the human being can desire comes to him or her, the absolute freedom of his or her thoughts, as well as the absolute freedom of the use of the might, which emanates from the thoughts. This freedom is a creation-given promise and provides a confidence for the existence and fulfilling of the evolution according to the laws of creation, which are not integrated into any kind of religious or worldly ideational dogmas or other forms of this kind, just as the creation itself is not. The individual freedom of the human being's thoughts, which is assigned to him or her by the laws of creation, and the mightful use of the thoughts, makes him or her a Weisen which is capable of the conscious evolution, which in addition to that the human being can individually form according to his or her own choosing and will, according to his or her morality, character, entire personality, and according to the state of his or her psyche. As a separate individual unit of power and love, intelligence, knowledge, and wisdom, and as master of his or her own thoughts and the might of the thoughts, the human being, himself or herself, holds the key to every conceivable situation in his or her hand. This key is the might of the thoughts, a regenerative means for change, which is intrinsic to every rational human being, and with the help of which human beings can make themselves into that which they want to be, just as they wish. The human being is always, and in every moment, master of his or her own situation, and indeed, even when he or she suffers affliction and misery, or when he or she feels weak, ill, and abandoned. Through the might of the thoughts, each human being determines his or her own state, and indeed, as a rule, via the psyche, which is formed by the might of the thoughts in a negative or positive, or rather, neutral positive equalized way. If the human being forms his or her thoughts in a neutral, positive, equalized way, then he or she is raised by their might into unimagined heights, and is rewarded with love, harmony, and joy of living, as well as with success and so forth. But if the human being allows himself or herself to fall, and if his or her thoughts become negative and unequalized, then that human being is assailed by weakness, failure, sorrow, disharmony, and abasement, fear of life, and reluctance regarding life. Thus, in any case, the human being is always the master of his or her directly existing state, called forth and formed by the might of his or her thoughts, because, as the human being thinks, so he or she feels and acts, and his or her state and condition forms accordingly. Therefore, the human being can be regarded as the master of his or her personal household, of which he or she, specifically, is in charge, and which he or she forms according to the might of his or her thoughts. If a human being thinks about his or her life circumstances, and carefully searches for the truth of that law on which his or her very own personal basin is based, and if this is actually also found, then the human being can become the wise master. And this law is nothing more than the actuality of the might of the thoughts, through which all energies are directed with intelligence, and which forms the thoughts themselves, such that they produce fruitful results. The thoughts are therefore formed by energies and intelligence, and are also provided, by the energies, with power and might, which result in negative or positive acts and deeds, and so forth, corresponding to the will of the particular human being. If everything is handled according to the creational laws in a neutral, positive, equalized form, then the human being evolves into a conscious ruler, carer, and beneficiary of his or her thoughts and their might. He or she becomes the conscious master of his or her thoughts and their might. Every human being can become the conscious master of his or her thoughts, but to that end it is necessary to discover in oneself the laws of the thinking. However, the discovery of these laws is fundamentally a matter of self-analysis for the purpose of self-cognition, and naturally it is also a matter of the correct use of the creation of thoughts as well as of the constantly growing practical experience and living of the thoughts and their effects. But as a matter of fact, such proceeding, searching, and digging is necessary, because only thereby can the truth and the laws of the thinking be found. Gems of the truth, which are of lasting value. Once a better and more comprehensive self-cognition is gained through a self-analysis, then every truth about one's own and real basin can also be found. To this end, it is only necessary to dig deeply enough into one's own ego. There, where the fundamental truth of one's own basin is actually concealed. And without doubt, the truth that every human being is the smith of his or her own life, morality, character, psyche, and entire personality, and is altogether the master over the building of his or her entire fate, can be proven by every woman and every man to herself or himself, if that human being's own thoughts are observed and monitored, as well as changed, if the effects of the thoughts on oneself and on one's own life, and the life circumstances and ways of life and so forth, are observed and analyzed, as are also, however, the life, the personality, and life circumstances, and the way of life and so forth, of other persons to the same degree. Through the following and observation of these things, the evidence can doubtlessly be produced, and indeed especially if cause and effect are brought into connection with each other, through patient practice and investigation, and if all gained practical experiences and the living of those experiences specifically find a practical use, whereby even the most trivial, mundane experiences and the effective processing thereof are of decisive significance. Thereby, knowledge about one's own personality is obtained, which leads to the understanding of oneself, and it leads to the wisdom, whereby a monstrous power and might arise. As it has been put so beautifully since time immemorial, quote, "Knowledge is might." Since ancient times, the saying has prevailed that those who make efforts regarding a matter actually will also harvest results. However, this saying strikes at the core of the truth nowhere better and more precisely than in relation to when the human being makes the effort to clarify his or her thoughts, which then become more valuable, purposive, and productive, and form life in a more harmonious and more equalized way. Yet, everything needs patience and practice, as well as an unremitting effort, because only thereby can the door to the real knowledge be found and opened in order to make useful the truth which has been found.